Welcome to Deadline. Exciting, vibrant, intelligent discussion. I'm Carey Campbell, where politics and media meet. A discussion and critique by some of Washington's most seasoned journalists and pundits on how the media has covered the week's news. On our show today, the 2012 elections, presidential primaries roll. Roseanne Barr takes second place in the Green Party presidential primary. Meanwhile, do the neocon and super PAC billionaires have the Republican presidential primary firmly in their hands, with one notable exception, Ron Paul? Then, from presidential politics, we talk China. China leads the world in high-speed rail and solar energy. Are the Chinese controlling the U.S. and world economies? Should the U.S. take something from the Chinese playbook? And then on to foreign policy. Should the U.S. save $100 billion, 100 billion tax dollars this year to get out of Afghanistan? What to do in the Middle East? And in the media, is the Fourth Estate doing its job in the United States? And the Arab awakening. Yemen gets a new president. Our guest on the show, Martin Sieff. Martin Sieff is the chief analyst for the Globalist. Welcome, Martin Sieff.
Thank you very much.
Pete Tucker. Pete Tucker is a reporter for thefightback.org. Welcome, Pete
Thanks
Tucker.
so much. Great to be here.
And via Skype, Rhett Smith. Rhett Smith is a favorite son of the Texas Green Party, seeking the Green Party presidential nomination. Welcome, Rhett Smith, and welcome all.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Rhett, let's start off with you. Dr. Jill Stein seems to be the leading candidate for the Green Party, winning most of the delegates in the primaries. Roseanne Barr coming in second, Dr. Kent Mesplay third, and you being a favorite son of Texas, how do you see the Green Party presidential primary stacking up?
Fantastic. Of course, in Texas, we have a convention. It's not a primary, so we will select our candidates during the state convention. And I'm very thrilled that we are having more candidates. As you know, we've talked about the green campaigns and the ballot access issues and trying to get recognition in all 50 states. It's an uphill battle, but it's very important that at a crucial time in our nation's history that we have green candidates, as many as we can.
Martin Sieff, let's bring you in here. Now, first off, when I read your resume, you know, I used to be a kid 40 years ago reading the news, and you were working for United Press International. So I did the old rip and read days, so it's a real pleasure to actually have somebody who was writing the copy I was reading. Your impressions of the Green Party presidential primary, as well as moving on to talking about the Republicans. Roseanne Barr got 6% in a national poll. If the Greens got 5%, they'd get matching funds in the general election. Your thoughts on Dr. Jill Stein, Rhett Smith, the various Green candidates, and their role in this election?
Well, with due respect to Rhett, I think it's very much in the Green Party's interest that Roseanne Barr should be the candidate for one reason, and very obvious reason only, and that is name recognition. Because what is crucially important to the Green Party is, as you say, getting above that 5% point where they can get matching funds. They have to get matching funds to be able to finance a sufficiently high-profile campaign. And in what could be a very close election, and it's very much in the Green Party's interest that it be a close election, they could tip a balance, as Ralph Nader did. Now, of course, Nader's, from an environmentalist point of view, Nader's candidacy in 2000 was a catastrophe and a sick joke. He put in George W. Bush, the most anti-environmental president probably in our history so far. He kept out former Vice President Al Gore, who would have certainly been the most environmentally conscious president, even if one didn't agree with all his positions. So, but the one thing Nader did show was that a third party candidate can tip the balance. And that's obviously what the Greens have to go for in this election.
Mr. Tucker, thefightback.org, your observations about the Green Party, and do you share Martin Sieff's analysis?
Well, with respect to Ralph Nader in the year 2000, I do not share Mr. Sieff's analysis. And it amazed me that to today, the Democrats refuse to step up and address the fact that particularly African Americans in this country do not have access to the ballot. Through a variety of mechanisms, they have been kept out. Votes that are cast by African Americans are largely go uncounted, and that is why Florida was stolen, that in a Supreme Court decision, not because someone exercised the democratic process to bring forward critically important issues that remain to this day. And with regards to Green Party candidacies at this moment, they certainly may have some new energy in light of the Occupy movement that has infused this country with much more discussion about wealth inequality and corporate influence on government, amongst other issues.
Now, we saw a network debate last night for the Republican Party. Rhett Smith, Green Party candidate for president down in Texas. Gentlemen, all of you, want you to weigh in on this. Do the Republicans, do the Democrats, does the Green Party, is the media giving fair and balanced coverage to each? Rhett, take that first, please.
Oh, sure. I appreciate getting to address this. Here in Texas, of course, we had a governor that ran for the office of President of the United States, and it's quite clear that the media is pandering to an extreme segment of the so-called evangelical vote, and very disappointing in the 21st century that we would still be in that kind of mode and that kind of theocratic hierarchy, but that is the case, and it's a sad comment on America.
What about coverage of you and Greens, Rhett? You get fair coverage?
No, absolutely not. They're afraid. The people, as we've talked about before, people are afraid to step up and declare themselves as Green candidates, and the news media similarly.
What are they afraid of, Rhett? What are they afraid of?
They're afraid that they would be ostracized, that they would be cut off, that they would not have, access to funding or businesses or whatever support that the major parties, the two parties have.
Martin Sieff.
I don't agree at all. I think there is no such thing as what's unbiased media, certainly not in this country. What we have in this country is a fragmented media. The right have their own tamed media. The so-called mainstream media is liberal, secular, conformist, and they at least pay lip service to a lot of green issues. Hollywood, on both television and the movies, is enormously sympathetic to green issues. I think the problem with the Green Party is a different issue from sympathy for environmental issues. If the Green Party can get its head above water in this campaign, then it will get a lot more media respect. In my 30 years and more of experience in the media, producers in the media tend to tilt mildly left rather than right, unless they're paid by right-wing organizations, unless they work for right-wing organizations. But for both, for Fox News and NBC and CBS alike, you have young producers in their 20s frantically running around with lists, and they're very superficial, they're very fast reacting. If they know a name, they will bring someone on board. Even Roseanne Barr really doesn't have the name recognition she had 20 or 25 years ago. Doesn't come close to it. But I see you're scribbling down notes for a response to me there. If you don't have name recognition, you don't break surface in America. This is not primarily an ideological issue. It's certainly not. It isn't even a big money issue, though certainly money buys access in America. Of course it buys access in America. But you've got to have name recognition or you'll get nowhere.
Mr. Sieff, can I ask you a quick question?
Certainly, sir.
I think that most of us know very well what the defining issue is for the Green Party that keeps us out of the mainstream, and that's our policies regarding the Middle East.
I don't agree, sir. I mean, Ron Paul certainly defies American consensus on the Middle East, and he has no problem getting name recognition at all. None.
Well, on the point of Ron Paul, he's had. I mean, he is the second highest winner of the electoral votes. I think they've counted so far. He has consistently polled very impressively.
Delegates, you mean?
Delegates. Thank you. And yet, look at the coverage. When Paul comes in second, they'll say that Romney ran away with it. Versus if it's 1 and 2, if Santorum comes in second, then they say, oh, it's a two-person race. So Ron Paul has been excluded incredibly. The one exception may have been John King of CNN last night did, I thought a very fair job. But he's pretty consistent. But no, Ron Paul has had an uphill battle when it comes to getting his name out there, despite a very vibrant candidacy and one that is a stark departure from anything I've seen with regards to U.S. foreign policy.
We want to go now on the street to see what folks are saying about their impressions of the candidates, whether Green, Republican, or the incumbent.
No, I feel like it's inefficient. I like to get my news pretty much on the internet. That way I could sort out relevant stories.
They tend to make complex and subtle issues, they have to simplify it. So you don't get the full story in that sense. I think some channels or some outlets are better than others, for example.
Well, although I truly believe and count on the stability of the economy of the United States, I don't think that the information that we get from the journalists are genuine because they are sometimes guided by interest and they do not have a full scope of a background of a story that they put forth. And it's very dangerous because people usually do not wait to find the facts. They just go with the flow, and that can be very dangerous.
No. It's a good question, obviously. I'm just laughing because that all depends on what news you're watching. I think my choices that I watch and read are very good and balanced and accurate. I think some of the others are not so much. So, it depends on which ones you read. And I think mine are very accurate and complete.
It's fascinating always to me. It's those of us who've been reporters for years.
Exactly.
You go to the street, and the insight and intelligence you get from people is just amazing. And it's not like in the day when we were kids, Mr. Sieff, and we were reporting, is it? Where we went to Walter for our news.
Well, you may have, but I was Irish, and therefore we didn't have to go to Walter for our news, so we didn't grow up spoon-fed.
Mr. Tucker.
I just had one point about the media being liberal, and there is nothing liberal about the media, which I think is why we've seen the Occupy movement take off. Fundamentally, I think that the Occupy movement was about occupying the media, and that major issues have gone undiscussed with any consistency, with any in-depth reporting for years on end. And so now it is to take a public space where you cannot be ignored, to use independent media and social media to force these issues through alternative routes to the people. And then it's started a movement that then forced the corporate media to now cover it. So I don't see anything liberal. I just want to make one comment about that, about where our media is today.
Rhett, I want to bring this down to you in Texas now about media coverage. And not a word of it last night in the debate, no question asked by John King. And that is this, as a veteran myself, and I know you are a vet, Rhett Smith, a Navy vet, is that right, sir?
Yes, United States Navy.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, his important work on Afghanistan was published last week, covered in just a couple of places, which basically boils down to saying that the United States the media has not properly reported for the last 10 years what's going on, and that's damaging the government. Can you talk a little bit about your impressions of that coverage, Rhett?
Absolutely. I am familiar with the story. I remember when the story broke about Lieutenant Colonel Davis, but and I feel very strongly that we have not gotten balanced coverage from the Middle East, and I guess that's to be expected because, as you know, when the United States is engaged in hostilities, then the media is controlled. It's just like, they always said that Fox News was Dick Cheney's news organization. In other words, it's quite clear that there is a bias and a systemic bias that is planned that way. And I think journalists that go out on a limb like Amy Goodwin Goodman and so forth that, wanted to have, Democracy Now! And those other types of news were ostracized.
I want to come to Martin Sieff now. Mr. Sieff, in preparation for the show today, you wrote a superb article in January of 2005, How Bush Got the Iraq War Cost Wrong. And you quote Anthony Cordesman, a security expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Just coincidentally, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis quotes the same Anthony Cordesman about U.S. military spending there. I want to quote from the document, from the Colonel. One of the key questions most readers must be asking at this point: how could an extensive, pervasive misrepresentation be done by major media in the United States? It is a cumulative failure of our nation's major media in every category: network news, cable news, magazines, and major newspapers. Do you agree?
Yes, actually, I very much agree. And I'll take note here. 2 American foreign correspondents have been killed or died in the course of their work in Syria within the last couple of weeks. I didn't know either of them personally. One was Marie Colvin, who worked for the London Sunday Times. The other was Anthony Shadid of the New York Times, formerly of the Washington Post. Now, I am scathingly critical of most of the American media. I think Colonel Davis is right, but the fundamental reason for that is that the quality and standard of the American media in foreign coverage is negligible. It has flatlined over the past decade. There is nothing there. It is incredibly easy to pull the wool over the eyes of the American media. And a key reason for that is the lack of investment and commitment to foreign news, which is across the board in all the areas you said, Carey, in broadcast news, cable news. They haven't even started putting anything significant in investment on podcasting. And, of course, the joke that print newspapers have become. Anthony Shadid and Marie Colvin, and again, I stress I didn't know either of them personally, but they are irreplaceable, because they were both exceptionally honest, intelligent, knowledgeable, courageous, fearless. They are irreplaceable because it used to be, there were never a lot of people with such qualities, but there would be, you could count on 20 to 50 of them. I can't think of anybody left who can replace Anthony Shadid and Marie Colvin.
Mr. Tucker.
Yeah, it's not only just that U.S. media is lacking abroad. It's the same thing here. We've just had an evisceration of newsrooms. I'm a local journalist here. I just came from a protest about a project that's costing hundreds of millions of dollars, and local residents can't get jobs. The unemployment rate is through the roof, and there's just not a single reporter. So what we see abroad, we're also seeing here at home. And yeah, it's been a full decade of war in Afghanistan, longest war in U.S. history. Can anyone make the argument that we've had the equivalent amount of coverage for the longest war in U.S. history? It hasn't been there.
I want to quote one more item from Colonel Davis's document. Recently exposed is the case by the Pentagon's Inspector General, that's DODIG, in an investigation regarding the Defense Department manipulation of the public message. And he quotes retired General Wesley Clark, who said when he had said things on CNN the White House did not like, CNN then suddenly told him they were going to need to release him from his contract. We've got more opinions on the street about the election and whether or not a third party can make a difference in this election cycle. Let's go to hear what the folks are saying.
You know, Obama is doing pretty good at this point. You know, the Republican Party is very divided. A lot of attack ads, towards Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich. I'm personally a fan of Ron Paul on the Republican side, but he's been doing kind of bad these days. But, I think that Mitt Romney will probably come up on top when all said and done.
I think it's really sad right now, the Republican field. It doesn't really seem like anybody stands for anything that is in the best interest of everyone. You've got Santorum out there with his own far right-wing agenda looking to really discriminate against anybody who's not like him. I hate to think there's a lot more out there like him, but I'm sure there are. And Gingrich, who can't really seem to manage anything. He's got these great ideas he likes to throw out, and I'm not really sure what Romney's about except getting elected. And I think he'd probably do the least damage to the country, but that's a heck of a way to choose a president, is voting for a guy that does the least damage. I'm certainly going to vote to reelect Obama, and with no hesitation.
My forecast is that the Republicans, their candidates are very poor candidates. Romney is a terrible candidate. Santorum is extremely right-wing, and I forecast an easy Obama victory.
Well, I think Obama will probably be reelected, but I think there may be a strong nominee from a third source, maybe from Americans Elect. Have you heard about that? I think they may put up a viable candidate.
A strong third source, perhaps a nominee out there. Dan Rather, former CBS News anchor, said not too long ago that in the era of super PACs, suddenly if you pick up $500 million, even if you're Dr. Jill Stein in the Green Party, you become a very viable candidate. Martin Sieff, please speak to that, and also this, you might talk about this new entity, Americans Elect.
Well, I'll take Americans Elect seriously if they get somebody serious to run as their candidate. If they could get somebody like Mike Bloomberg, the mayor of New York, automatically they're a player. And again, unfortunately, we're in a psychological, subjective popularity contest. It doesn't matter how solid or sometimes how superficial the platforms are. You have to have a candidate with name recognition who at least appears credible. I think the most serious potential third-party candidate by far is Ron Paul. And my gut instinct is, whatever he says now, and he's denied it all up to this point, but he's 76 years old, he's high on running for the presidency, he's never had this level of recognition before, and he is very sincere about what he stands for. There's no question about that. I think that if there is going to be a significant third-party candidate, it will be from the right, not from the left. It will be Ron Paul, and he would certainly ensure President Obama's re-election, but for the same reason that those folks were very wisely saying on the screen right now. We have a very weakened Republican Party. It's more inward-looking than an ingrowing toenail. They're only concerned about their own obsessive little ideological issues. They get more and more ridiculous as the campaign develops. Romney is their only potential candidate to reach the mainstream, but he's got no fire in his belly. And so my money's on I agree. I think the president is going to be re-elected. It might be by a narrow margin. I think a much narrower margin than before. But if the economic recovery stays stable and we don't have a major surprise or crisis before November, the president will be re-elected. Pete Tucker, fightback.org. Let's get the one presidential candidate we have on the show, Rhett Smith in Texas, with us. Martin Sieff's analysis there. Rhett, one other interesting aspect, in 2008 when Ron Paul was running for president, of course there was a coalition of Greens, of Libertarians, constitutionalists who were interested in Ron Paul as a unity candidate under a Green umbrella. What's your take as a favorite son seeking the Green Party nomination down there, Rhett?
Sure, I certainly understand exactly what Mr. Sieff is talking about and what you're talking about. And of course, the incumbent, President Barack Obama, is clearly a favorite right now. The Republicans are in disarray. But, for those of us who are progressive and want to see a better environment and want to see a more peaceful world, then we're going to keep working. And if we could get some kind of unity, several third parties coming together, that might be viable. But right now, we're just going to keep working for, those key issues that, human rights and world peace and a global, and ecologically and environmentally improved planet. Thank you.
Pete Tucker, can the Green Party, can the third party, can Americans elect either or led by Ron Paul, which might be a possibility? Can they take this election, or can they really change policy?
Well, I don't know about taking the election. It's the way the U.S. political system is set up.
And the 99% include them there.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that it's not so much about whether the third-party candidacy comes from the right or the left. It's because that's politics is not really right and left as much as top versus bottom. It is what the Occupy movement has said, something along the lines of, the 1% versus the 99%. And so when you have a groundswell of support, then whether they can take the election, I don't see that happening. But can they force major issues into the debates and make these issues be addressed? For sure. And I would also say that I don't see Ron Paul's candidacy, I don't see it as being so much to the right, because not domestically maybe, but on foreign policy, this is, I think, where a lot of Americans are at, which is we don't want to spend billions of dollars, literally $1-2 more billion a day to hurt people halfway across the world. And yet you don't see this coverage on the media. And so when you have one of the few access to the American people that you have is through these debates. And so when you get a candidate onto the debates who's making these points, without the corresponding coverage that would be appropriate for someone gaining that kind of votes, he has touched a nerve, Ron Paul, in this country because he's touching on something that Americans feel, which is the foreign policy using our tax dollars does not represent our values.
Rhett Smith, it sounds like Pete Tucker's talking about your peace department that you like.
Yes.
We want to slightly shift into an economic discussion now, and China's role in the world economy. Is China running the U.S.? Is it running the world? I want to start off by reading you some numbers. China leads the world in high-speed rail, 90,000 miles of track. That is twice the circumference of the Earth. 2 million people work in rail in China. 7,000 miles of high-speed rail. And that's trains traveling 160 miles an hour. The Shanghai maglev goes over 260 miles an hour. The gross domestic product of China, 2/3 of the United States, 11 trillion. Gentlemen, now with the new vice president who was here last week with the Elvis hair, we've got to work with him. Martin Sieff?
I agree we have to work with him, and there's a very major reason why nobody in the political parties, and I don't think any of my colleagues on this show will dare to say why we have to work with him, because there is more power in China than there is in Washington right now. The United States runs a deficit with China of $270 billion a year. $270 billion a year. 35% of all U.S. Treasury bonds are owned by the State Bank of China. China's investment in and its economic and political power in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America far surpasses that of the United States, the European Union, or Russia. China isn't going to run the whole world, but China is in many respects already in pole position to be the most powerful nation in economic terms in the whole world. Sure.
Peter Tucker?
I don't have a lot to say on China. I have to read up more from Martin and others on the issue.
All right, Rhett Smith, the Green Party candidate for president. Rhett, you're running for president. You've got to have Green Party answers for this. What are they?
I absolutely do. The Department of Peace, as we've talked about a little bit, is a global plan for 7 billion people to coexist. But specifically about China, and I really appreciate the comments of Mr. Sieff, I do agree. China needs to step up to the plate, and we need to encourage China to step up to the plate to be a world leader. China could play a huge role in bringing about peace in the Middle East, with Iran, with Syria, with other actors in the Middle East, and this is the time to do that. This is one of my major criticisms of the current administration, not taking advantage or not encouraging China and not understanding the opportunities that we have, maybe, the first time in anybody's lifetime to think about world peace.
Let me give you a couple of other numbers here to perhaps put it in perspective. China spends less than 1/10 of what the U.S. spends on the military. The GDP per capita for the United States, $48,000 a year. China, $8,000 a year. And this figure, when I was researching this, particularly surprised me, Martin Sieff, and I'd like you to explain it if you can. The poverty level, 15% of the U.S. population below the poverty level, 2% of the Chinese.
That's simply not true. There are lies, damn lies, and statistics. Poverty in China is vastly worse than it is in the United States, and this is why Chinese economic policies are so aggressive, because the Chinese government does feel a moral obligation to provide sufficient food and energy for 1.3 billion human beings. The People's Liberation Army has more than 4 times the number of troops of the U.S. Army. That figure is going to go up to 6 times as the U.S. Army shrinks. They simply pay far less on infrastructure. They pay far smaller wages. So the figures that you just quoted are simply fallacious. They do not reflect reality. Don't reflect reality at all.
Mr. Sieff, those numbers are from the CIA World Factbook this morning.
Precisely. And all of a sudden, my colleagues are going to believe anything the CIA says. The biggest thing about the CIA isn't that they're evil. I don't believe they are. The biggest thing about the CIA is we spend $60 billion a year on the most incompetent, useless, paralyzed, idiotic. I have lectured to these people. They don't even know, they haven't even read the New York Times front page of the day when you quote figures from it. And these are quite senior officials. Our intelligence services are the most pathetic and overrated in history. They can do a good job if you task them with something very specific. Get bin Laden, which Bush never did. President bin Laden and Leon Panetta deserve the full credit for tasking the U.S. Intelligence services to target Osama bin Laden. Incredibly enough, for 7 years, Bush and Rumsfeld and their merry men didn't even keep an interagency task force going on that. So that's what our agency is good at, if you give them a single tiny little target to go for. But as an overall assessment agency for the way the world is run, it's a joke.
And as an experienced journalist, I'm going to ask a question first and then refer back to Lieutenant Colonel Davis. What is the American public to believe if we can't believe our Central Intelligence Agency? Lieutenant Colonel Davis makes the point in his dereliction of duty, 89 pages, and this is unclassified documents, as Colonel Douglas said, I'm no WikiLeaks 2. He made the point that none other than the current director of the CIA, Mr. Sieff, supporting actually what you've just said, that General Petraeus, when he was a general, how can I say this gently, didn't exactly represent the facts on the ground to the leadership. What are we to believe, Mr. Tucker? You're a journalist?
I'm a journalist who's come of age, let's see, with 2003 we saw there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We saw a media propaganda campaign carried out by both so-called intelligence services, which Mr. Sieff I think has rightly called out some of the insufficiencies there, and by the mainstream media, the New York Times, and then Judith Miller's reporting, and then it was carried out on NBC, and from there it was a fiction became a fact. And so we have a major problem when it comes to a lack of reporters, as was pointed out earlier, who are independent, being able to dig. And so it is confusing about what to believe. And if you look at why we're in Iraq, 1 million deaths, millions more displaced, it's because of lies and because we don't have the infrastructure when it comes to independent media, when it comes to any type of media, to give us facts. And so it's confusing and difficult. And it's scary because, look, now we're about to go after Syria, or certainly making threats against that, and we need better reporting about whether this is a good idea. And if you look at our track record when it comes to regime change, it's not very good. It certainly hasn't benefited the people of this country. And if we had a better history of a better understanding of our own history too, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to how we, 1953, overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh, a democratically elected leader, but we're not getting this on the front pages of our newspapers. We're not getting this elsewhere. And so Americans are they don't have a sense of the history, and then it allows for a continuation of problematic policies that I think a lot of Americans find objectionable.
Martin Sieff.
I would agree with much of what you said, but having said that, the great issue is not a sinister, knowing cabal manipulating the media to push policies through on 99% of the people. It's much more frightening than that. It is a totally ignorant, incompetent media and a totally ignorant, criminally incompetent political class. And they haven't been informed. They don't care about being informed. They believe they are informed. They don't realize the dangers out there. And I will cite one thing that came my way. Colonel General Nikolai Ivashov, Army General, 4-star General Nikolai Ivashov, former Russian Chief of Staff, one of the most important political advisors to former and future Russian President Vladimir Putin, said within the last 2 weeks that Russia could regard efforts to could not stand by if there were efforts to destabilize the governments of Syria and Iran, and Russia might have to get involved. What does that mean? When this comes from one of the most powerful, respected, influential, senior military officers Russia has produced in 40 years. It means we are in danger of world war and we don't even realize it because we're blundering blindly into it. Because Marie Colvin and Anthony Shadid are irreplaceable and haven't been replaced, and there aren't enough people like them, and there is nobody like them covering Russia, almost nobody like them covering China. America is a blind nation that doesn't even want to see.
Well, I think Americans do want to see.
No, they don't. No, they don't.
I think that's why you've seen the growth in independent media. I think that's why Democracy Now!, which was mentioned earlier, Amy Goodman, has taken off across the country. And I think there's a real yearning for the truth, but you're not getting it in the mainstream media, which is, I think, why you've seen a growth in other outlets.
Rhett Smith in Texas, here you are. You're a Green Party candidate running for president. You got to give us some bright and shiny, sir. You've got to give us positive solutions to fix this mess. That's why you're running, Rhett.
Bravo, Carey.
Absolutely, and you know, this couldn't be a better forum. I'm very pleased with the panel here, and I think we have a consensus. If you think about the concept of a Department of Peace, where we would actually put forth a plan for 7 billion people to coexist and show how, you know, the planet could live and even prosper without military-industrial complexes worldwide. And this is really the solution, to actually have something in the works that we could show the American people and show the world that there is a plan, a viable plan. And, you know, with the internet, this is something that could actually be achieved. So this is a very bright spot and something that with you know, with it, like you say, the rise of the other media, the third media that really is not mainstream, this could really help so many people.
Now, Rhett, I know that you and the Greens have called for an auditable accounting system at the Pentagon. I believe you say count the money. Is that right, Rhett?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I agree with many of the people, Ron Paul, and the whole question about the Federal Reserve System. If you look back historically, and your panelists certainly know that probably global finance has contributed a great deal to global war, and the fact that we have not, over hundreds of years, not been able to achieve world peace. We need to count the money, and now maybe we, you know, with the Occupy Wall Street movement, maybe we'll do that.
I want to read to you from Colonel Davis's report, and this is from just in December, a cable TV show in Kabul, where an Afghan senator said this, and I quote, "Basically, the USA is not honest with the Afghan people and the government. The USA in Afghanistan is here to pursue its long-term objectives in Central Asia, Russia, and China. The USA, and I quote, lies a lot. This is not good policy for the American people. It's not the policy of the American people, but it is a policy of the U.S. military and the CIA, which are going to oppress the weak countries the way they did in the 18th century." Unquote. The central point there, gentlemen, is here you have a senator in an allied nation, Afghanistan, an allied nation, saying that, implying that our very own politicians, which I believe Martin Sieff supports your point, have not done the due diligence to know what's going on, and the concern is, among other politicians around the world, is that the American politicians won't do the work to really understand the problem, to find the solutions.
Well, I think that's very true of both the right and the left alike. I think there is a crucial issue which nobody ever mentions about the decline of American democracy that goes back to Lyndon Johnson. Not when he was president, but even before that, he was already disastrous and corrupt and destructive. As Senate Majority Leader in the 1950s, he pushed through virtually unlimited funding for every congressman to have gigantic numbers of staff. This meant in real life, it wasn't supposed to do this, of course, it was supposed to make them more knowledgeable. Instead, every congressman and senator developed their own private mini-government in their own imaginations. They brought in staff who were, in order to succeed and be close to the congressman or senator, you had to be a courtier, not an expert. And senators and congressmen were relieved of the need to do their own due diligence. And they all became mindless puppets of their own staff. And they spent most of their time running to generate enough money in the plutocratic system that we've got to ensure their own re-election. So the quality, instead of ensuring due diligence, Lyndon Johnson, with his usual catastrophic haplessness, remember this is the president who was the real president who plunged us into Vietnam and made it a shambles in the inferno of Southeast Asia. He effectively destroyed the capacity of the American legislature to monitor. And nobody in the American legislature, I mean, it used to be when you met senators, they were impressive. Now most of them are just talking dummies. I've met my share of Hollywood movie stars, and I'll tell you, people like Brad Pitt and George Clooney, as human beings, and in terms of intellect and character and honesty, are head and shoulders, light years above your average senator in Washington from either party.
Well, speak to that, Rhett Smith, down there. I believe Brad Pitt has worked with your party in New Orleans to build green homes, has he not?
I've heard about that. I'm not completely familiar with that story, so I don't want to comment.
Martin Sieff was just talking about a fellow Texan down there, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Rhett Smith. You want to take up for Lyndon?
No, certainly not. Mr. Sieff is correct. And, when you look at that period of our history with Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, it's just a tremendously frightening period. My God. You just did not know what was going to happen, and I challenge anyone to say that they were not afraid, of the power that those men wielded. But I have just two quick comments. They were talking about the Middle East and our policies and our ignorance. I would only remind people of the British Empire and the great ignorance and the kind of theocracy that they ruled with, and WikiLeaks, the idea that we could somehow expose the treachery of these, the diplomacy in the Middle East.
Pete Tucker, thefightback.org. Shifting now to the Arab awakening and a new president in Yemen. A president by consensus. We heard Rhett Smith of the Green Party refer to consensus here among this group and a way the Greens like to talk and operate. Is there reason for optimism with, I guess this president in Yemen ran like 50% of all local, state, and federal races in the United States unopposed? Is that right, Mr. Tucker?
I wonder who the consensus is with when it comes to Yemen. I guess it's the elite, because he was in the top of the Saleh government. So now he's just coming in. There's reason for hope in the uprisings that we've seen, but they haven't played out too well necessarily. I think the optimism that people had and hopefully still have has not necessarily played out in substantial gains. We have seen, and you've also seen some of it being co-opted with an infusion of military, U.S. oftentimes, military weapons being supplied. So it hasn't. So I don't know that it's necessarily a huge step in the right direction with this number two, or whatever he was now, being the consensus leader.
What's the single most effective foreign policy positive step you would make, Rhett Smith, down there in Texas?
Yes, absolutely. If you'll have time to check my campaign platform, I'm a big person that supports the First Amendment. And I think both in foreign and domestic policy, this very crucial part of the American Constitution, the Revolution, that the First Amendment that gives us so many things, the freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And if we could universalize that and at least get that concept, because people around the world know about the First Amendment. They may not, be able to quote it, but they certainly know about freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and they respect America for that. And that is so crucial. America can't be every place and do everything. But that concept of the First Amendment, I think, is the pinnacle of the American Revolution and certainly should be upheld wherever we can universally.
Freedom of speech, Rhett Smith, that's what you're talking about, right?
Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to petition your government, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble. What we're doing right now, what you and I are doing right now. Yes.
Martin Sieff, certainly not anything that we can oppose here. From your experiences, so many years as covering in the media, your sense of the landscape right now in the world, is there a magic bullet in foreign policy for the United States right now?
Yes, there is, and nobody will take it. Actually, President Obama is trying to take it towards China, and that's a good move. We are not demonizing China. President Obama is taking a lot of flack because he is genuinely trying to work with Vice President Xi to recalibrate, but certainly keep viable and renew a good working relationship with China. What we have ignored catastrophically is the most militarily powerful and dangerous nation in the world, Russia. Russia, whose strategic missile forces have more than 1,000 times the destructive capacity in nuclear power that China's does. We continue to blunder into Russian space. Nobody here, nobody on the campaign trail has mentioned American forward policy in Georgia, in the Caucasus. What would our reaction be if Texas or New Mexico had become independent and the KGB or the SVR, as it is known now, was actively involved, and there were Russian military advisors in Texas and New Mexico pushing presidents and policies hostile to the United States. The resentment and hatred and paranoia towards America in Russia is enormously dangerous. I wouldn't have a Department of Peace peace studies. There are going to be wars and rumors of war and fights for resources precisely because there are 7 billion people, whatever the United States does or does not do. What I would try and do is get the United States out of the firing line. We need to stop pushing democracy and human rights around the world. The Russians interpret that as pushing fascism around the world. We label it democracy and human rights. They say this is just a cynical American ploy for American policy, so they call it fascism. The point is not what it is. We mean, by and large, we mean genuinely well in this. The problem is by pushing for policies we find admirable, we are making people furious. You won't like this, sir. Rhett, you won't like this. But the fact is China hates us preaching on environmental issues. They say when we preach against the Three Gorges Dam, we didn't preach against the Tennessee Valley Authority in the 1930s, and we're still not preaching against major dams now. That's the Chinese answer that I've had from many Chinese officials and interlocutors over the years.
It's good.
We have to respect and listen to and heed what other people and other nations believe and think. We're not doing that.
Pete Tucker, Rhett Smith, we're going to give you a chance. We want to go out on the street and answer this question among those out there. Should the United States change its foreign policy? Let's go now.
I think basically we're on pretty good ground with foreign policy in the Middle East.
I think we should stay out of that region.
What's going on is very complex and it's causing the United States to reflect on where it stands with its relationship in the Middle East, in particular the relationship with Israel and with Egypt and the like. We can't ignore what's taking place in that part of the world. And yet I think we're just trying to find our way to see if we can come up with an appropriate solution. We can't disappear from the scene either. We have to be on the scene. But here again, history has proven we don't know enough about the area to make informed judgments. That's a blind spot on the United States part. We don't know enough about Islam. We don't know enough about the Middle East. And that shows, that we've got a lot to do before we make any decisions.
Tucker, thefightback.org, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that last gentleman, I think that I appreciate hearing from people on the street. We don't know enough about other parts of the world. We're over there because it's an oil-rich part of the world, and our economy runs on oil. And we need to have a serious evaluation of energy policy and the damage that we have done. The damage that U.S. foreign policy has done is just incalculable. And I think that earlier we were talking about Lyndon Johnson and what he launched a war on poverty. And that war on poverty seems to have become a war on the poor here at home. And that's really the only appropriate war that we should be fighting. We should not have more than 700 military bases throughout the world. We should be paying attention to the pain that people have right here, not inflicting it on people all throughout the world.
Rhett Smith, Green Party candidate for president in Texas. I know you have called for cutting subsidies, taxpayer-funded subsidies for auto, asphalt, coal. What else, Rhett? And called for more solar, more wind, those energies to level the playing field. Can we do that solar stuff down there, Rhett? Can we build all that rail with a level playing field without American tax dollars?
No.
Of course not.
Thank you for your honesty, sir.
Yes, Mr. Sieff is spot on, and we just had an election here in San Antonio, and they wanted to have a 1 mile rail system in the downtown, and people were outraged because it's going to cost so much money, and if the federal dollars don't pay for it, then the local taxpayers. San Antonio is one of the most impoverished major cities in the United States. I mean, this is crazy. But
Mr. Sieff?
Look, I would disagree with a lot of what Rhett says, and I would agree with a lot of what Rhett says, obviously. But right now, simply the technology, the science, the engineering does not exist to allow solar, biomass, wind, all the rest of them to produce. Take a look at the figures of the Energy Information Administration, and they are not skewed figures. Right now, 45% of our electrical generating energy comes from coal. By 2035, on the most optimistic figures of a Democratic administration, that will still be 39%. We are going to run out of uranium a century before we run out of coal. We need coal, and therefore it makes sense to develop carbon capture technology. I'm all in favor of as much rail as possible. I would level the playing field to use federal taxes for local rail systems. I'm all in favor of hybrid cars. I'm all in favor of fracking mining because we need as much natural gas to replace oil as possible. I'm all in favor of developing the technology, whether it's from cosmic rays or solar radiation or what have you. Solar radiation in long term, in terms of pure physics, is the only thing that makes sense. But we could be 10 years from that. We could be 500 years from that. It makes sense to pour research and development into that, but we don't have it. And until research and development delivers the goods, we have to use the fossil fuels we've got because nothing else will give us the energy we need in realistic terms. And therefore, our best bets are natural gas, which has a low carbon footprint, and coal, as long as we develop carbon capture technology, which doesn't require miracle breakthroughs in physics. It just requires incremental developments in engineering that we already have. So these are the ways we have to go.
Peter Tucker, do you agree, for example, coal, he spoke of, along the mountains right now, we've got the mountaintop mining.
What's left of the mountains?
There are lots of. I think you'll find the Rocky Mountains haven't disappeared.
Yeah, but a lot.
Nor have the Appalachians.
A good part of them have.
No.
The mountains are being blown up, and there's no such thing as clean coal. And I think that what we have to come to grips with, and we will one way or another, is that the thing that we must do is not keep pumping the environment filled with toxins, with carbon, with CO2. That is the thing that we cannot do. but we're treating it like we must have a certain amount of energy, we must run the economy the way it is, not that we must treat the earth respectfully, or we're going to put an end to our not just our own species, but we are headed off racing off a cliff here, and we got to think sensibly and have creative solutions such which have been brought out, and not just think that because we've used this much energy today, this is what we need to do tomorrow, and therefore we're going to need coal, we're going to need nuclear. I think generations to come will look back and say, this is insane. This is insane to keep doing that which is wrecking the earth.
Is there a good microphone quality now?
Well,
Can you hear me?
Rhett,
Good.
Carey
Okay.
Campbell, very quickly, Rhett, are you with us or did we lose you? I guess.
No, I'm here.
All right. Were you able to hear what they were just? The topic was solar, wind, geothermal. All right. You wrote one last question, Rhett. Is there any key point here as we're winding down the show that you've wanted to make, whether it's China, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's media coverage of the election? That we've covered, that you want to be sure to mention that you failed to?
I think we have hit the major points, and I agree with Mr. What happens is that we are kept in the dark. That it's quite clear that here in Texas and other places, they don't want us to understand the Middle East policy or China policy or anything else. And our educational system shows it. Our media shows it, and we need to reinvest in our entire system as far as bringing young people to learn about the environment, to learn about the ecology, and to learn about foreign policy.
Rhett, are you going to make it to the debate for the Greens in Arizona Saturday? Can you go to that?
I cannot travel to Arizona. I would certainly like to teleconference in Arizona.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us today, Rhett Smith in Texas. A couple of other quick points, gentlemen, I'd love to have you comment on. My sources in South America tell me that it looks like in Venezuela, Chavez may not make it to the election. Do you have any news on that?
What my news is the same as yours, Carey. I don't think he will. He has an aggressive cancer. Ironically enough, because he's so anti-American, he did not come. We do things right in this country, not everything. All too much we do wrong. But much of our medical treatment is the best in the world, especially against many cancers, the kind of which he has. And in significant part, possibly, if he had come to America earlier enough, ironically, his cancer might have been caught in time. But the indications is that he is in a bad way. He will go before the election, but Venezuela will remain very strongly in the Chinese and Russian orbit. His brother is most likely to take over. You could call it a Castro solution.
Pete Tucker, can you add anything?
That's the first I'm hearing about. I've obviously seen that Hugo Chavez is not doing super well, but I did not know that he might pass away. I would say on his front, he has shown what you've seen an emerging South American left that is willing to. I wouldn't disagree. I don't think they're in the Chinese or the Russian camps. I think they've shown independence and autonomous governing and actually doing what's in the best interest of their own people, not necessarily what's in the best interest of U.S.-backed multinational corporations. And that has been why they've been so much antipathy.
We're running out of time, gentlemen. One quick other topic. Germany's president resigned this week, the second one to resign in 2.5 years. Will this new guy who they've nominated, Joachim Gauck, you think he'll pass the parliament?
Oh, he'll pass the parliament, and he's a decent man. Germany is a stable democracy, and the president is a figurehead position. The chancellor has the real power.
And as we come down the stretch here to wind up the show, we want to bid a fond farewell to the publisher Barney Rosette. He fought literary censorship. He died this week at 89 years old. And I want to read you no time. All right, I'm out of time. I thank you very much for joining us today on Deadline, where politics and media meet. Join us again next time. I'm Carey Campbell.